Don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years. And if you were just stick with it a little bit longer, you might see it change. It was all happening just because I was breathing.
And that was the scariest thing about it, is it was such clear thinking.
Don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years.
We live in a time full of online advice. One inspiring speaker after another who's taken a 7-week course and now calls herself a life coach, or a psychologist who has a master's degree and calls himself a doctor. They say the right things, and amazingly, they always have an answer for everything. But how deep does their advice really go? Do they take their own advice? And are they really as nice people as their words will have us think they are? This video takes a closer look at new, revealing details in Meghan's interview with AOL. Meghan talks about the causes she's involved in and gives advice to people. But what do her words actually tell us about these causes? And how does her advice compare to her statements in other interviews? Welcome back to the channel, and if it's your first time here, welcome aboard. As always, I promise to keep the video empowering and inclusive, or something like that. Subscribe for more videos and click the like button, which always helps. Let's get to work.
But for me, I don't just want to show up somewhere and wave my hand and feel like that's enough. Like if I'm going to have my name attached to it or I'm going to do it, I really get very hands-on, which is exhausting, but you can sleep a lot better at night knowing that when you put your thumbprint on it, you feel really proud of being a part of it and you know that it's being done well.
As I've pointed out in previous videos, Meghan speaks from a script. She repeats the same self-serving passages, almost verbatim from interview to interview. And this passage is no exception.
Anything I get involved with, I don't want to just show up on a red carpet for a cause and wave my hand without knowing what I'm really doing there and why it's important for me to be there. And really putting my own personal thumbprint on it. It's my handwriting on the site.
What's the reason for repeating this passage? What self-serving motives could there be? First of all, she gets to say that she's different from the typical celebrity, that somehow she's involved on a deeper level. She says, for me, underlining that what's about to follow is a personal reason, allegedly. As if anybody would want to wave their hand without knowing why. This comparison to a less desirable group makes her look that much better, linguistically that is. Hands-on is another expression from her script.
And I certainly know how passionate I am, and Harry and I see the world so similarly in our approach of being very hands-on with things.
The script is also revealed by the impersonal pronoun you rather than I. As opposed to personal felt experiences and emotions, the pronoun you points to general experiences, buzzwords and idioms that could be applied to any situation and by anyone, without even working for the UN.
Is exhausting, but you can sleep a lot better at night knowing that when you put your thumbprint on it, you feel really proud of being a part of it and you know that it's being done well.
Linguistically, she doesn't say that she's exhausted, that she sleeps better at night knowing this, that she knows the work's being done well. No, these are general descriptions, cliches that we've all heard many times before, and more importantly, cliches that all people could repeat without being associated with the organization. Secondly, she says the work is exhausting, and next we find out how she defines exhausting.
But yeah, I mean, shadowing was crazy. I mean, sitting in, seeing some of the briefings for what they're going to say to Ban Ki-moon, our UN Secretary General, and understanding how that piece of it works, or understanding different pillars of an organization where they'll say, okay, there's meetings about the environment, and then there's a meeting about health and wellness, and a meeting about safety and security, and then a meeting about women's issues. And you go, okay, but aren't women affected by all of those things? Right? Like you can see where pieces of the puzzle are missing, and I think for me it's really helpful to just be able to experience it so I can speak better about it and do more about it.
Meghan can't even describe the organization without the constant appeal to the demographic she's paid to say she advocates for.
What does the work entail? What do you do?
Yeah, so last February actually, I went to Rwanda, which was incredible because Rwanda has the highest percentage of female political participants of any other country in the world.
This issue is a way for her to navigate any interview. She was supposed to say what the hands-on and exhausting work entailed. Instead, she just used it as a tagline, drawing the conclusions for the audience. She's so focused on ideology, or what she's rehearsed more like it, that she doesn't even acknowledge that the environment, health and security issues affect all people, not just the demographic she's trying to appeal to. Quite exclusive for such an inclusive person, I would say. Just like every single virtue signaling celebrity or politician. But I guess we shouldn't think too hard about that. Meghan obviously thinks she's making a good point, that she's found an astonishing connection. But in reality, there's a reason why the UN has different departments, to include all demographics, at least according to the advertising. It's noteworthy that she resorts to this go-to narrative after a micropause, losing her train of thought.
And understanding how that piece of it works, or understanding...
Unintentionally then, she lets us know that this is a go-to narrative, and that there probably wasn't a whole lot of work involved. It's also very telling that she doesn't detail the missing puzzles part. Which pieces are missing, and how does she specifically help put the puzzle back together? It's so puzzling. Meghan loses her train of thought when she's asked about her work specifically, and revealingly, she prefers general descriptions.
Because I feel like we see the photos,
Yeah.
but what is the experience actually like?
Well, my trip to Rwanda last year was very different because it was just, it was primarily at Parliament. I did go to a refugee camp, though, which was my first experience of that. And I think it's being there is a very different experience than what you see on TV. Of course, it impacts you so much so that, this year I was back in Rwanda.
Furthermore, what she's describing isn't work. It's a guided tour. Thus, she fails to provide sufficient grounds for her claim that the work is exhausting, and that it's work at all. Returning to the point about go-to narratives, the following is Meghan's standard answer when asked about a certain television series.
This girl grew up on the set of Married with Children because of her dad.
So every day after school for 10 years, that's where I grew up. I was there, which is a really odd place for a little girl to grow up, let me tell you. I remember, because I would be at the tapings and I'd be there all the time. And I'd be in, I went to all-girls Catholic school, so I'd be in a little school uniform. But then you'd watch like Tracy Lords or Tia Carrera walk by in a school uniform. My dad's like, "No, Meg, that's not the same." Different kind of vibe.
This passage is almost identical to the one in this interview.
If you can pinch me, I'm real. See, oh yes. My dad is a DP, yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I grew up on the set of Married with Children every day after school for 10 years. I was there.
Wow.
I know. It's a very perverse place for a little girl who went to Catholic school, no less, to grow up. Because I'm there in my school uniform, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then the guests...
Next, Meghan continues to reveal that buzzwords mean more to her than content. She's so focused on using the right words that her statements and calls end up sounding contrived.
Bonnie has been wonderful to me. And just, I love women who I am able to look up to and say, they have done so much in terms of leadership, but also promoting diversity. And what she's, like USA Network especially, I feel really proud of. Jessica Pearson could have just been cast as a white man, and Rachel could have been cast as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, and they've really embraced changing the landscape of television in that way.
She mentions leadership as a general term, devoid of definitions and examples. When she can't find anything to say, she resorts to the buzzword diversity, which she really wants to say, probably because it's a virtue signaling word that linguistically makes her look good. When mentioning diversity, her speech rate is significantly faster than when she was trying to find something to say about leadership. Here we observe micropauses and vowel lengthening, all indicating hesitation. So linguistically, Meghan shows that she wants to talk about the buzzword rather than detailing the leadership part, which would have added actual content to this interview, but of course we can't have that. She says they really embrace changing the landscape of television. She's making the filmmakers sound like pioneers when the truth is there's been diversity. I'm using Meghan's terminology here, not my own. in television and movies for more than 30 years. She's talking about her show, Suits, which started in 2011. There were female protagonists in some of the most popular action movies of all time, Terminator and Alien. And that's the point. To ideologues, the truth is secondary to the cause, which isn't much of a cause at all, but it's important for them to keep talking about the cause in order to not only stay relevant, but also to achieve the power and privilege they really want. Buzzwords are an effective way to achieve that because they show that you're part of the in-group. In the end, however, no one benefits from it, least of all the people who now have to use these buzzwords for the rest of their lives, unless they want to be unpopular. And they certainly wouldn't risk that, even though they're stunning and brave, of course. Because as we all know, it's so brave to regurgitate talking points that everyone in pop culture agrees with, or pretends to agree with, out of fear.
And now I'm sure we have some questions from the audience.
We're going to start with a question from an online
I bet you
viewer.
have one in the front.
Okay.
Okay, so Tim would like to know, what advice would you give to a young aspiring actor graduating this year who also wants to be charitable and change the world?
Let's ignore the naivety of the question and focus on the answer, which is just as vague and irrelevant as the question.
Wow, Tim has a lot planned. I would say slow and steady wins the race. My mom always sends me little turtles from wherever she travels as a reminder of slow and steady wins the race.
It's worth noting that her answer isn't specific to philanthropy. Once again, I humbly apologize for this buzzword. Slow but steady wins the race is a phrase that could be applied to most situations in life. This phrase is about the way someone is doing something. It's not about what someone's doing. And as we've seen, Meghan has a hard time describing what the actual work entails, other than the exhausting, overpaid travels to other countries, of course. So in that sense, it makes sense that you can't tell the brave, philanthropic Tim what to do.
As a reminder of slow and steady wins the race. No, I think look, a couple pieces of advice I've been given that have really helped is that don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years. And I think especially starting off when you're making a commitment to want to have a career choice or something that's high value to you, oftentimes people become really easily discouraged. And if you were just stick with it a little bit longer, you might see it change.
With the initial no, Meghan contrasts what she just said to what she's about to say. In other words, she lets us know that the slow but steady part was filler and/or an insufficient answer. We have another instance of Meghan resorting to a go-to response from her script after yet another moment of not knowing what to say.
That have really helped is that don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years.
She used the same answer in this interview.
It's so easy for us to get distracted and to lose interest, but they said, don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years.
This shows that the script means more to her than engaging in the conversation in the moment. Because once again, this answer isn't about what, but how. And the how is just as unsurprisingly generic as the slow but steady advice. Also, she obviously didn't take her own advice as far as the royal family is concerned. She gave it 5 minutes, but not 5 years. Meghan, and Harry of course, let's not forget him, got married in May 2018, and in January 2020, they announced they would be stepping back as senior members. This means less than 2 years living in the UK as wife and husband, suffering the press that the two of them blame for the problems they themselves have helped create, both knew about before getting married.
I made the choice to not read anything, positive or negative.
And have made hundreds of millions of dollars and complaining about ever since. From authentic interviews to meaningful podcasts and heartwarming documentaries. It wasn't so much that they left as it was the way they left.
Concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What?
Meghan and Harry could have stopped the rumors and implications by speaking out, but they had a financial and self-righteous interest in keeping them alive. When they found out that that tactic didn't work, Harry deceptively tried to retract his and particularly Meghan's damaging claims.
In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
No, we didn't.
Well,
The British press said that.
right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they were racist?
She said there were troubling comments about
There was concern about his skin colour.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't.
Contrary to Meghan's advice about not being discouraged and being deeply committed to a career change or cause, which sounds like something from a fortune cookie, by the way, the two of them proved that words and actions are two very different things. They threw everything at the wall, but nothing stuck.
It was terrifying to have my brother scream and shout at me, and my father say things that just simply weren't true, and my grandmother, quietly sit there and sort of take it all in.
This short clip teaches us a lot about Harry. He uses the positive image of living and deceased family members to make his case. Here he says his grandmother had to take it all in, but what he actually wants to bring attention to is how traumatizing this was for him, allegedly. As if his grandmother were automatically on his side, and as if William didn't think the same in the moment. Thus, Harry creates a protagonist-antagonist framework, even though he's unreliably claimed not to want sympathy. Never mind that sympathy was the entire and only idea behind the inspiring docuseries.
To see this institutional gaslighting, they were happy to lie to protect my brother. They were never willing to tell the truth to protect us.
The ominous music paraphrases the traumatic event. Stylistically then, the music sides with Harry, and without questions from an interviewer, Harry's words are given absolute truth value. As if his status as a victim is a given, a multi-million-dollar victim at that. This isn't the first time that Harry's shown that he and the newspapers he dislikes so much have something in common.
The documentary notably shows how similar stories about her and Kate Middleton were spun differently, painting her in a negative light.
This is how it was covered for her. This is how it was covered for her. If you don't see the difference and understand why it's being reported that way, then I can't help you.
He's doing what he blames the press for doing, using a positive story about Catherine in a negative comparison to Meghan for self-interest. Meghan and Harry, on the other hand, are portrayed as cute and naive. This is part of a documentary's distraction, immediately presupposing that the self-proclaimed protagonists are victims, and then staging scenes that have nothing to do with the protagonist's claims and complaints, in order to make the audience forget the lack of real proof. It's all about making the audience emote in order to make them sympathize with the charming duo.
Snapchat.
Oh gosh, isn't that whole thing? It starts like dog ears.
Dog ears.
That's what he saw of me.
That was the first thing I was like, who is that?
This is ridiculous.
It's worth noting that Meghan and Harry were in their 30s when they coincidentally met each other. But as part of the sympathy tactic and cute and naive image, they behave as though they were and are much younger than that. With this image, they can anticipate any objection about their past and present motives for leaving the UK, for doing interviews, books, podcasts, and so-called documentaries.
And then she sent me an email saying, I know you said you're single, and a friend of mine asked about you, and maybe you'd like to meet him. And I said, who is it? And she said, it's Prince Has. And I said, who's that?
And I suppose that was when she asked if Harry was nice, because as we all know, that was the only thing she wanted to know.
The only thing that I had asked her when she said she wanted to set us up was, I had one question. I said, well, is he nice? Because if he wasn't kind, it just didn't.
An interview Meghan also had some constructive things to say about, once again showing that she doesn't get discouraged easily.
In your engagement interview,
Orchestrated reality show, yeah.
Or what about this overdramatic, pathos-appealing clip?
I wasn't seeing it, but it's almost worse when you feel it through the expression of my mom or my friends or them calling me crying, just like, Meg, they're not protecting you. And I realized that it was all happening just because I was breathing.
This 18-second passage contains 3 instances of the personal pronoun I, 2 instances of the possessive pronoun my, 1 instance of the object pronoun me, and 1 instance of addressing herself as Meg in an overacted hyperbolic citation.
Like, Meg, they're not protecting you.
Which doesn't sound like a citation at all, but sounds like Meghan's own thoughts, channeled through her loved ones to make it seem like she wasn't alone in thinking this. In other words, a passage like this is very self-centered. Everything's about Meghan, even though they're about to watch the Oprah interview for the first time, allegedly. The intentionally underexposed room is meant to enhance the realism, the authentic, raw emotions of this organic scene. So even in a scene like this, with the 2 of them supposedly watching the interview that's still causing damage to Harry's family, the audience is supposed to feel sorry for Meghan and Harry. An interview where learning the national anthem was stated as an actual problem, in all seriousness. But still, we're to believe that it was so touching that Harry had to cover her eyes. Sure, the dramatic music is absurd compared to what was said in the interview. Let's refresh, briefly, with a slightly different kind of music.
There was no guidance as well, right? There were certain things that you couldn't do, but unlike what you see in the movies, there's no class on how to speak, how to cross your legs, how to be royal. There's none of that training. That might exist for other members of the family. That was not something that was offered to me. But even down to like the national anthem. No one thought to say, oh, you're American, you're not going to know that. That's me late at night Googling.
If only the docuseries had been this brief. Meghan's habit of acting, not only changing her mood, but her entire personality, understandably makes it hard for many people to believe what she says.
It's like, all of this will stop if I'm not here. And that was the scariest thing about it, is it was such clear thinking.
She herself makes sure to make pauses to ensure the dramatic impact of her words. The filmmakers don't even have to edit anything. While shaking her head no, she says it was such clear thinking. This way, she anticipates the objection that she didn't really have this thought, or that she was and is exaggerating. However, ironically, the need to articulate that it was a clear thought actually weakens her assertion that it was. Harry has witnessed Meghan's behavior firsthand. The following is a quite worrying passage from the Oprah interview.
The moment that she came to you, had the courage enough to say out loud.
I had no idea what to do. I wasn't prepared for that. I went to a very dark place as well, but I wanted to be there for her.
And also, we didn't leave right in that moment, right?
Yeah.
We still, that's almost a year after.
It's worth noting that he says he went to a dark place as well. The words as well indicate that he wasn't in a dark place prior to Meghan saying this to him. This passage indicates surprise and shock, as opposed to the official narrative that both of them wanted to leave. But because they've blamed anything and everything and have made so many excuses, it's hard or impossible to know which excuse to trust. So, in conclusion, when Meghan says this,
but being in these different villages, I think it just puts a different level of perspective on the things we take for granted and the things that we complain about, right?
And this.
Don't give it 5 minutes if you're not going to give it 5 years. Oftentimes people become really easily discouraged, and if you were just stick with it a little bit longer, you might see it change.
It doesn't sound entirely convincing. Understatement of the year. Now let me end this video with some powerful advice that has inspired me in not only a deep but also profound way. Actually, this advice is so empowering that it's helped me realize the magnitude of my actions. It's so real and authentic. I feel it in my core, and I just can't wait to share it with you. Sorry, we've run out of time.